Awesome. So welcome to our Agile Coaching Q&A panel. I'm going to have the panelists introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your Agile coaching, and I'm going to ask you what I asked from the group. What is or has been your biggest challenge in Agile coaching? Um, a note about the questions that they will be answering tonight. The panelists have not seen these in advance, so I want to thank the panel for being open to some fresh, kind of unrehearsed thinking. And I want to thank all of you for submitting these questions. There were so many good ones, and I will try to get to as many as I can. And I apologize in advance if I have missed your question. So panel, is Amber here? Amber, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your agile coaching and your biggest challenge.
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Amber Masterson. I'm excited to be here and talk with you guys. So, I actually started out my career as a QA engineer. I was a QA engineer for about 10 years and then recently made the transition over to full-time Scrum Master about 6.5 months ago. Loving it so much. So glad to be in this new role. And one of the challenges that I'm working through right now is learning how to reduce toxicity between teams and how to foster more emotional, or not emotional intelligence, psychological safety. That's the word I'm looking for. So that's something I'm in the process of exploring right now.
Thank you so much, Amber. Joyce, how about you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Joyce Vargas, and I'm a Scrum Master and Program Manager at Atlassian. Um, so my background is in user experience design. So I was a designer for about 10 years. And my Agile journey started about 5 years ago when I joined, I would say, my first true Agile Scrum team. Had a really great Agile coach and Scrum Master, and just through them, learned the value of Agile, saw the potential, and really got hooked. So after that, I spent a number of years, I would say, as unofficial sort of Agile advocate, Agile enthusiast, team coach, and then more recently made a switch over officially to a Scrum Master. So that's been about almost 2 years now that I've taken on the role. And yeah, I'm excited to be here, and I feel like I can learn a lot from all of you too. So yeah, excited for the conversation.
Joyce, what's been a challenge for you?
Yeah, biggest challenge. I think that in my experience, bringing change to the team for me is relatively easier than working at scale. So more organizational change with sort of key leadership stakeholders. So I find there's a lot of challenges in getting buy-in, and sometimes, in my case, you sort of have initial buy-in. Everyone's like, "Yeah, let's do agile." Like, it's the right verbiage is all there, but you still find that there's opposition and resistance to change. So yeah, that's my biggest challenge.
We are definitely going to be touching more on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Shweta, last but not least, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hey everyone. So thank you for having me. My name is Shweta Mistry. I work for Bloomberg based out in New York. I'm an agile coach. So my journey began probably prior to my career beginning, only because I was always trying to think of a way how we could work better, and I didn't even know something called Agile existed. So it was kind of a mind-blowing discovery when I did find out that it was there and it's a real thing. So it's super exciting. But my career began as a developer, so about 12 years as an engineer, and then about a decade, or probably a little bit over a decade now in the Agile space. So transitioning to a Scrum Master at some point and then moving on to coaching. So it's been interesting to say the least. Many, many challenges. very interesting ones and inspiring ones, I would say. And I find it's always a continuous learning journey. So I won't say what my biggest challenge was, but I will say what my most memorable challenge was, because this story sticks with me all the time. And anytime I need to talk about challenges, I usually go there. So we'll start there and see where it goes. It's really about working with a singular difficult person on a team, and how that affects everyone else and how it can become a domino effect. And it's surprising, we definitely deal with the challenges large with leadership and broader organizational impediments. But you'll be surprised how when you get smaller and you deal with just the one person, that's pretty significant too. So yeah, that was very interesting for me.
We do have a question coming up about individual coaching, so I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that. You
Sure.
kind of touched a little bit on a bit of your journeys. The first question here is really just a little bit about your career path. There's a question about, I think we're all kind of, no matter what your role is, we are agile coaches. We are kind of in the mindset of agile and coaching people towards that. There's a question about maybe how an agile coach might be different than the role of a scrum master, and any training or experience that you have found helpful in your career. Um, any thoughts there?
Well, I can go.
Please.
Um, so I think when you're thinking about the role, I think your environment really defines what your role is, whether it's a Scrum Master or an Agile coach. I've seen Scrum Masters essentially being Agile coaches, and I've seen Agile coaches essentially being Scrum Masters. And I think the slight difference and variation there is, in all, the Scrum Master is the Agile coach for the team. So it really is working more directly with the team and really owning the process with the team. At least this is my experience and my opinion on it. Whereas the Agile coach may do a level of that, but even then go out broader, right? The tough part there is, though, it doesn't mean a Scrum Master can't go beyond the team and talk to other people as well. So I think it's a very fine line, and it really is, where are you spending more of your time? Is it very much team focused and team centric, or is it broader than that? So I think that's the big difference I've seen and I've experienced in my career. I think the second part of your question was making the transition, was it?
Yeah, any kind of training or classes, any experience in your background that you've found helpful to bring to Agile coaching?
So that I can definitely speak to, and all of you are doing it right now. It's by showing up here. I owe my career in every shape, way, and form to community. That's where I've got to say it started. It continues and it continues to grow, right? So I've been very active in the local community, initially as an attendee, and then I joined hands with local organizers and became part of the community. And just what I learned from even my peers and outside of my organization, it's amazing. It's I'm getting some feedback from somewhere. Okay, still getting it.
I went ahead and muted.
I'm not sure. Okay, it's clear now, so that must have worked. So I would just say, draw on all your resources in community, learn from other folks, because you can certainly, go to trainings. You'll learn a lot to get your foundational knowledge in place for trainings, but it's continuous learning that's going to get you to make the transitions and keep becoming the best that you can. And each and every day is different. So, every morning my feed is full of a whole bunch of articles. I'm talking to people. I feel like I'm learning every moment. So do that, and you've already started.
That's amazing. So it's a continuous journey that just never ends, and we're here and we're doing it right now. Joyce, I'm particularly curious about you and your background. So you were in UX and then you transitioned to being a Scrum Master. What kind of unique skills or training or expertise were you able to bring into that role?
Yeah, it's funny because whenever people hear about my background, they sort of like, they're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I don't see how you could make that jump, right? But for me, it was really clear. Basically, as a designer, you're sort of trained every day in what you do to look at the problem, dig into the problem, and try to find a creative solution for it. And then you're also always focused on the user, right? Kind of being customer focused, human centered. So for me, that translated very easily over to being a Scrum Master, because I am always identifying what are the problems, what are the inefficiencies, the dysfunctions, and then I'm trying to, collaborate and craft solutions around it. So it's sort of like the same work but different medium, if that makes sense. And then instead of focusing on the user, it then becomes, individuals and interactions, so people first. So yeah, for me, it was like a very logical, natural kind of shift.
And Amber, kind of the same with you. You came from a QA background into being a Scrum Master. What did you take from that experience?
So one thing that I think really helped with my QA background is I was very used to working with cross-functional members. I worked with developers, I worked with other testers, I worked with product owners, and just having that like deep team experience and understanding like where common pain points were teams that I was testing with. That really helped me a lot when I switched over to a Scrum Master role, because I already understood the tech lingo, which was helpful, and then understanding common challenges that every team faces, or most teams face if they're human teams. So that was really helpful. And I just wanted to piggyback on what Shweta was saying about getting involved in your communities to keep learning. That has been one of the best resources that I've had in my journey, is meeting at the local Utah meetup groups. And there's also a Utah Agile Slack group where everyone's just always pinging all the time, or just there's like a resource section, a help section, just general chit chat. And that's been great, because anytime someone has a challenge, or if I have a challenge or something I want ideas on, we can just post it in there and you'll get a ton of responses. That's one thing I really love about the Agile community, is everyone's so friendly and willing to help each other and share ideas. And I think we are this resource experiences.
I know earlier Chris shared a link in chat to the Scrum Professionals meetup group. That's actually how Amber and I met. There is, of course, this group, the Bay Area Agile Coaching Circles. But I'd love to hear from the people here in chat, or if you're comfortable sharing, what communities have you joined that you have found helpful on your journey? Please share. Would love to see those resources. And maybe while we're doing that, so another question that we got, so now that you are in an agile coaching role or in a Scrum Master role, what does a day look like for you in the role? How much of your time do you spend coaching versus doing other things? And what are those other things that you're doing besides coaching?
I'm tempted to share a picture of my calendar. So I have 4 teams, and so I counted, and I'm in meetings for about 32 hours a week of scheduled meetings. And so in addition, I have a bunch of one-on-ones that now I'm actually doing every 3 weeks to sort of not overload myself with like managers and other folks that I need to be in touch with, because that's just a really important part of the team, is especially since I was hired remotely after the shelter in place, not remotely, but shelter in place. And so like I've never met anybody in person. And so just trying to build those relationships. So in terms of coaching, if you mean like one-on-one coaching, I don't spend any time one-on-one coaching.
Yeah, we will be looking forward to seeing that screenshot, Deborah, if you can get that in
Share
chat.
it with you guys.
Ooh.
It's pretty funny.
Throwing it out to I saw Amber, you unmuted. What is your day look like as a Scrum Master?
So it really depends on the day. Some days I have a lot more meetings than others. Right now I'm working with 3 teams, and it for me it's really ebbed and flowed. And actually, one of the questions that I had for my manager, who was a former Scrum Master when I first started, I was like, okay, so I finished all the meetings. What do I do now? And he's like, well, that is a great question that every Scrum Master has. And I really liked his counsel to me. He's just said, when you have downtime, when you're not working with the teams or not in meetings, that's a great time to continue improving your skills. He's like, anything you can do to improve yourself and your skill set is going to benefit the team. And so that was awesome for me, because then I could work on personal development and strengthening my skills and learning new things that will help the team. And I didn't feel guilty about it, because it's all stuff the better that I can get at my job, the more that I can help my team and the better that they can do with their stuff as well. So that's one thing I would definitely recommend, is when you do have downtime or you're in between meetings, don't know what to do, read some good articles, learn some new skills, reach out to people, brainstorm sessions, things like that.
Self-development, so important to help yourself so you can help your teams. Joyce, how about you? What's a typical Atlassian Scrum Master day like?
Yeah, so there's the usual, facilitating Scrum ceremonies, mainly for my team, but sometimes I'll get asked to kind of, help out as a third party for another team. There is some one-on-one coaching. For my particular case, I think the product owner role is one where I can really help out a lot. They're often, I would say, overburdened and overwhelmed. And so there's a lot of coaching that can happen there in terms of helping them, understand like backlog prioritization, management techniques, writing stories, all that kind of thing. And then I also it's sort of based on need, but I'll end up doing ad hoc, I guess, like workshop sessions for the team if people want to learn how to write stories or learn about agile estimation. And then for me, recently, I ended up driving kind of a grassroots, scrappy agile transformation. And that really just stemmed out of me seeing so many dysfunctions and so many issues for my team. And so selfishly, I wanted to fix them all for my team. And they happened to be things that were, scaled organizational issues. So in the last half year or so, I spent a lot of time doing that. So I think that kind of gets to the whole, there is sometimes the crossover with Scrum Master, Agile Coach. So.
No clear line between them. And I don't think it's selfish if you're helping your teams. Shweta, I saw you nodding. I'm curious, a day in New York, what is that for you?
So when I'm in office, actually in New York, I'm running around between 3 different buildings, so I'm glad not to have to do that anymore. But very similar to both Joyce and Amber, it really does depend on the day itself, but also kind of which department you might be working with, where in the journey you're at. Is it at the beginning? Are you kind of in the midst of it or tapering off? So where I sit in the organization, there's several of us, so we form an agile team, and we work mainly on the organizational impediments. So we're looking at kind of overall organizationally what needs to be helped with, but then also we have coaching engagements. And then on top of that, we might be running training workshops. And then based on past relationships also, I find I end up mentoring and coaching one-on-one a lot as well. So it just really depends on what combination is happening that week or that day. But typically in the coaching engagement, when I'm starting off, I generally tend to have more leadership conversations because I'm really looking for buy-in and support. you get it sometimes, and then other times you don't. Sometimes it starts off like you're going to get it, and you kind of figure things out as you move along. All ebbs and flows, like I think Amber said. And then as you move to the midst of it, I find I tend to work closer with the teams. So it's really maybe it's working with their Scrum Masters, maybe it's actually being kind of a fly on the wall in their Scrum events and just kind of observing and then giving feedback or suggestions. So I try to be more hands off, but then obviously there's suggestions that sometimes you're just like, you need to do this, like save yourself. So yeah, it gets interesting from that perspective. And then when I'm tapering off, it's typically just closing out, getting alignment, maybe ensuring that, there are still working agreements in place, and how do they plan to communicate and move forward so that it's sustainable. So, yeah, just depending on what stage you're at, it just varies. And then the other variation is also, are you working alone in an engagement, or are you paired with other coaches? So several combinations going on there, but I don't think there's ever the same day. It's, you might have this weekly schedule, but it still doesn't end up being the same day. So very different for sure.
And you touched on this in your answer. The next question, when you are coaching, it sounds like you're doing very different levels of coaching. I'm wondering what you consider or how you approach it differently when you're coaching at an individual level versus a team level versus an enterprise level. So, Shweta, I'd love to turn that over to you.
Yeah, so I think, it's somebody said recently to me, the answer is always it depends. So I'm going to start with that because it does always, it's always it depends. But so if I'm starting with the individual, I'm really wondering, I'm curious about why they're coming to me, right? Is it really like an issue that they're running into with the team? Is it something that, it's more centered around them themselves? It's really just asking the questions to kind of evoke responses to kind of understand what's going on. I do find, there's a level of empathy that you have to go in with at any level. And, I know there's very varying opinions on that. Some people just want to go hard in with process. Some people just want to go with open-ended questions. And I like to go in with the approach that this will probably end up being some long-term relationship, even beyond coaching. So when it's one-to-one, I try to connect with the person themselves, thinking that this will turn into a long-term relationship. And then if I take it to the next level, to the team, I will typically, work with the leader of the team. So our teams typically have team leads. So while it's not a formal Scrum role, the team lead role does exist. So I have to work closely with them to ensure that they understand what we're trying to do, and we get their support as well. But on top of that, one thing I really try to encourage is transparency across the team as to what I'm discussing with the TL as well. So it's not just like we're going to go off to the side, have a conversation, and then come in and say, okay, here's a solution, and here's what we're mandating, something like that, right? It really is bringing out the fact that the team can own their process, and that can sometimes take a lot of convincing depending on who the TL is. So, with every individual being very different to how they accept change or how they want to move along with change. I think, all of us probably experience that in some shape, way or form. That is going to modify the way I go in. So even when I'm going into the team, I will meet with each individual one-on-one, because I really want to understand what's getting in their way. And is anything even getting in their way? Maybe they're just happy the way things are, right? And it's good to understand that. So really going in, actually, at any level, it's trying to understand what problem they're trying to solve from all those individual perspectives, and then more from the holistic perspective as well. And then similarly with leadership, is it just that they heard about Agile being the next cool thing to do, and because the other department is doing it, they want to do it? Or is it because they really want to engage in the process, want to be a part of the change that needs to happen? So for me, I think the lead time into making change with the teams is really understanding where people are coming from and what their intention is with trying to do Agile or Scrum.
So it's not just announcing, hey, we're going to be agile, you a person, you a team, you a company. It's really diving into what have been the pain points and how do we organize to solve them. I
Yeah,
love that.
unfortunately, it's never worked that way for me. I will say I probably did try very early on in my career. I'm like, yes, I know how to do all this. I'm going in, I can knock it out. It's like a checklist. And then it was a rude awakening, but a good learning experience. And it's never been that way again.
Oh, people, they're so complicated. Joyce and Amber, do you have any thoughts on individual versus team versus kind of company? Joyce, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, as Shweta, you were talking, I was thinking of like the metaphor of if you think of like an NBA basketball team, and the coach role there. So yeah, just to echo, I think there is kind of two relationships. You can have the relationship with the whole team as a unit, and then you can have the individual relationships with team members through the one-on-one coaching. And then I also think you could take a different, mindset or approach to coaching. I don't think there's one right or wrong way, but for me at least, I was shaped by what I saw when I had my first Agile coach work with the team, and I really sort of saw it as this is the Agile expert that knows best practices. She's here to teach us, and we ask her questions when we don't know how to do this or that, and she coaches us through it, runs workshops. So that was kind of my mental model to coaching, and I think that informed how I coach teams. I very much am sitting with them, day to day, understanding their pain points, feeling the pain points with them. And then the other thing, kind of approach, which I feel like I've learned more recently through an Agile coach we have at Atlassian, it's sort of more of this idea that you as the team member, as the individual contributor, you have all the tools you need. You're the expert, you're empowered, and I'm here as the coach to help you figure out your own way, kind of thing. So that was a very different approach to me. But I think, through watching that too, I've seen that to be effective as well and really empowering, I think.
Definitely self-organization. Amber, how about you? The different levels, is there one where you feel like you're most effective? Yeah, what are your thoughts there?
So most of my experience so far has been just on the team level. I've had a little bit of experience in one of my old companies while I was still in my QA role, like helping facilitated training with more of the project managers and another development team. And yeah, I'm still learning about all of that. So I think I'll just second what the other two gals said.
Awesome. So this came up in some of the challenges that we're facing in coaching. Those leaders. Joyce, I want to send this one to you since you've just worked with leadership on an agile transformation. How do you work with leadership? Particularly, how do you get their support? And how do you move beyond going through the motions of agile or laying agile on top of something that isn't really working and really just turning that into being agile?
Yeah, I wish I had like the perfect answer for you, but in my experience, it's been really messy. And I like Shweta what you said about like a rude awakening. I think I experienced that a lot. Um, so I think, let me see. I think one thing is just like for me, I can really clearly see all the dysfunction and all the problems, and I know the answer, like because I'm like I've seen how this can work. These are the best practices. Everyone, this is what we should do, right? And what I've learned is I can give all the workshops, all the trainings, but I need to understand what their goals are, what the leadership stakeholder goals are, and usually that's around OKRs or kind of more business oriented goals and less about the system is broken. And so I sort of have to go about it that way, take the time to understand what their goals are, and then try to fix the same problems, but do it through speaking their language. And another lesson I've learned is for me, I love Agile theory. I love taking the courses and learning the history. I nerd out on all that, and that's what kind of like motivates me to, improve. So I try to use that with my leadership and give them the theory. And what I learned is what I should do, what I think could be more effective is to actually show them historic data about our teams, anything that I can measure and show. So, for example, one of the issues I'm constantly trying to improve is just having fully dedicated team members, setting up our teams for success and having stable teams with long-term continuity. And for so long, I just kept pushing that messaging. We need stable teams, our velocities all over the place, right? Giving them the theory. And it just fell on deaf ears. So it wasn't until I actually, because I capture all this through capacity planning, right? I actually charted out, look at our team over the past 6 months to a year. We had 2 designers here, in and out, 1 coming in here, like 3 product owners. This is putting our roadmaps at risk, right? It wasn't until they could see that actual measurable data that was applicable to our teams that something clicked and they were like, oh, okay, I guess we should set up our teams to be stable. So I wish I had learned that earlier, but it took me a while.
Speaking the language of the leaders and just showing them inarguable data. That's perfect. And we have a question about data and metrics coming up soon. Shweta, what has been your approach to working with those stubborn leaders and getting their support? How do you do it?
So I think Joyce nailed it, actually. It really does come down to speaking their language. I was absolutely the same way. Like, here's the theory, Scrum is really cool. Agile is what's going to save us, for our teams, and ROI and all the rest. And they'd kind of look at me and I'm like, why don't you get it? And it pained me because I'm like, I could see the problems really clearly. And I'm like, this is all you need to do. But getting that buy-in has to happen in a language that they understand. And a phrase that I learned over the last several years was, what's in it for me, right? So what you really need to show them what the benefit is going to be for them to support you and do the thing that you're asking them to do. So I definitely have found alternative ways of speaking the Agile and Scrum speak to leadership. And this wasn't, until I'd had a few failures, try and get, the traditional way of just going in with theory, like Joyce was saying. But I think they really are more about, hardcore data. They do want to see the results and the expectations and this big picture as well, right? So if you're able to translate what you're trying to do in terms of productivity, effectiveness, I really keep them away from velocity as much as possible because that just creates another storm. But really just, are you building the right thing? Look at your defects going down. Are your users happy, right? So some of those data points are hard to even show just because now you're even talking about beyond numbers, right? So getting those conversations going is interesting and challenging at the same time. The other thing I've also come to learn is forming partnerships. So if you're able to engage with other leaders in the company who have succeeded or who are more interested, form those partnerships, form those internal networks where you've got advocates that can work with you. And sometimes if you're able to bring them into a conversation and they kind of hear, the success story or at least something positive, they're more inclined to say, hey, you know what, this is something that actually worked in the company. It's not just something from outside being brought in. It's just not a new concept. I think then they're more encouraged. So yeah, I think, all of what Joyce said and those additional points for sure.
So building alliances, like
Yeah.
Game of Thrones, but a lot
It very much is that.
nicer, I hope. Um, Amber, I've got this next question for you. So I wanna paint a picture for you. We've got some leaders or some stakeholders, like 10 of them, and they're all coming to the team. They all have different things that they want done, and every single thing that they want done is the number one thing, the number one project. They want them all done right now. How do you coach the team or members of the team to make sense of all that and to prioritize when everything that people want done is the number one most important thing?
So that is a great question. So at one of my old companies, I was on the QA side, but I had an opportunity to do a coaching activity with another team that was experiencing the same thing. It was a Kanban pizza activity. And I invited the development team, but then I also invited the different product owners because this team was a shared resource. So I brought in the product owners and I brought in some of the managers too. And we did this activity all together and they were paired up on teams and I gave them instructions of how to make this pizza and they had a time box, but they didn't know what the time box was. So they had to try and do as little waste as possible of the ingredients, but cook as many slices of pizza as possible. And and throughout the time, I had the instructions changing, like what kind of pizzas they had to make. And at the end, we had a conversation. We had a conversation about it and how it was to have the different pizza requests changing and how that affected their ability to get their work done. And it was actually really cool. I had some of the product owners say, "Oh my gosh, we get it. We understand like if you ask for a slice of pizza and then in the middle you want a tuna fish sandwich and then you want a chicken sandwich, like and then you wonder where your pizza is, like if you have limited time and resources, that is hard to get all of those at the same time." So my suggestion would be if you could do some sort of activity like that, just like a fun, playful way to get them to see a bigger picture. And then also maybe it's a matter of doing product owner stand-ups or like bringing them together to coordinate their priorities so then they can determine together, okay, I have this going on, this is like time sensitive, like can you hold off on this a little bit? And get the product owners working together and coordinating their efforts so then they're more streamlined with the shared resources with the understanding like okay, if we coordinate our efforts then that will give our development team more focused time to accomplish what we want them to accomplish.
So I keep hearing this theme of what's in it for me and coaching teams, product owners, people around that. And also, I am craving pizza now. Joyce, from what I understand about your teams, they have stakeholders from all of these different departments, competing priorities. How do your teams make sense of it all?
Yeah, I think we struggled with it for a long time. We were really overburdened at one point and just had really one kind of product team fielding everything. Um, I think what Amber mentioned is key, that the product owner is a really key role here because they are the ones that are owning the prioritization and accountable for the business value. So a lot of it is coaching them to say no. And I guess when I say no, it doesn't necessarily mean a hard no. It's more like when, right? It's saying, yes, we'll add that to our backlog and we'll prioritize it and we can let you know, where it falls and when we could get to it. Because I think most product owners, they want to deliver stuff and they don't want people to be upset, and so they tend to kind of say yes, and then they try to squeeze it all in, and it's impossible. So that's one thing. And then another tool I found, again, just for my own team when we were struggling with this, was to introduce release planning. Um, so I know release planning is an optional exercise, but what that did for us is that we could do course estimates projecting out for more at a high level, so for a few sprints, 4 to 6 sprints. And we could clearly then have a currency to go back to stakeholders and say, this is our capacity for the next, amount of time. This is all the work, we're being asked to do. You can choose, what to prioritize, but we have to just use our currency, right? If we put one thing in, another thing goes out. So that helped a lot, just to give them, tangible currency to play with. And it also then makes it a conversation. So it's not just them saying, can you do this? And us saying, no, not now. But it's us saying, let's have a collaborative conversation and let's figure out the priorities together, given our capacity, because that's the reality. So that really helped us a lot, I think, the release planning.
Really, so doing the planning, having a realistic capacity, and just collaborating on that, and learning that a no doesn't mean we won't do it. It's just more a matter of when. Shweta, do you have any tricks or tips for prioritization?
No, I think these ladies covered pretty much everything that I've done in the past to handle this kind of situation. I think the clarity around, the current priorities is super, super important. And usually teams don't have a very clear roadmap, which is where they start then, being unable to relay back why they can't get things done, that are being shifted in priority. So I think if you're able to present that in a very clear and concise way, it really does clarify the picture. Not that it doesn't mean, that stakeholders will still walk away saying that's okay. They will still try to push, but at least you have a really good case as to why. And then also, to Amber's point, creating alignment across multiple product owners so that it's not a competition against each other. It really is them working together, because they do need to come together, especially if they're working towards the same product. And have alignment. Ideally, they should be working off of the same backlog anyway. But, sometimes if it's more broken down by department, they have different work streams. So they are very siloed in the sense that this is my work, I need to get it done. And you have to also keep in mind that depending on how your company evaluates them, they're probably being measured in some way for that delivery as well. So it comes back to creating that empathy of putting yourself in their shoes to understand why they may be behaving that way or not compromising with you, and just kind of, getting a better understanding of where they're coming from. And I think, if you can kind of make that connection as well, kind of at the human level, they're more inclined to be more responsive to the suggestions that you're making and forming more alliances across other product owners rather than kind of keeping it all to themselves.
And it seems to all go back to people and humans and empathy. We have a question from Deborah. And Deborah, if you want to elaborate on this, I'll read it out and then you can kind of tell us more if you're comfortable. I'm curious about stakeholders kind of changing priorities and what they want included in that. So either they're changing what they're asking for or they're clarifying requirements. Does this happen in the middle of the sprint? Has that happened to you? Like, how often is this change occurring and how do you respond? Deborah, did I get that right?
Sorry, yeah, that's my question is it like during sort of like the release planning, like higher level and sort of refinement period that these questions are coming up, or are they literally changing things mid-sprint? Just I'll add that we're very clear about that, the dev team's commitment is for that sprint and that sprint only. Right?
Amber, what were you thinking?
I was just gonna say, in my experience, we've had a lot of that too, where priorities change, or the customers thinks they want one thing, and then halfway through they change their mind that they want something else.
And that's mid.
But I think
that they do that. You're saying that's mid-sprint that they do that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you don't.
Which is challenging.
You don't
I'm
count,
sorry, what?
and you don't cancel the sprint then?
We haven't canceled a sprint yet, but sometimes I'm trying to think.
But curious why you wouldn't.
Well, that's a great question. So some of it our product owner has pushed back on, and either we'll like backlog that item if the work hasn't been started yet, or we're not very far along. Sometimes we'll backlog it and then come back to it. But I do think one of the beautiful things about Agile is the ability to pivot. And so sometimes, like, especially if you are able to have shorter sprints, then it's like if you develop something and after it's developed, they're like, oh, actually, that's not what we want. It's okay. You can just make adjustments in the next sprint, and they can, like, the demos help with that. And then I needed that feedback earlier is always helpful. We're still trying to work through that. But sometimes I think it's just having them, if you've already finished developing something and they're like, oh, that's not what we want, okay, that's fine. Let's take another look at it in one of these upcoming sprints and see how we can tweak and adjust what you have.
Deborah, I'm curious, how do you respond when that happens? It sounds like canceling a sprint is an option.
Well, it is an option, right? Nobody likes to do it, but it is. We're pretty hard ass about things. And the product owners really don't want to cancel their sprints, right? Because it looks bad on the metrics. Their little graph looks all screwed up then. And then they have to explain why it got canceled. And so Kyle's laughing. But anyway, we actually have had one canceled sprint. And we had a whole retro for the whole division to talk about what happened and how come. But a couple other like near misses, but they don't want to do it.
Yeah, but doesn't that tend to encourage continuing to work on things which aren't going to be needed? One would
Well,
assume that the people who are changing their mind have a reason for doing so.
well, the sprint's only 2 weeks long, so really, they don't know like 2 weeks of work what they want to have done for the next 2 weeks. I think that's pretty reasonable to expect our product owner would know what they want done for the next 2 weeks. If they don't, I would question the product owner. I don't know.
I
That's
can see cases where that's true, but I can also see teams in cases where that's not necessarily true, depending upon how the release cycle and how fast the iteration amount is with the customers. Like I've been on teams where 2 weeks is an eternity, right? Because you may not even be working on the same area of the product in 2 weeks or on the same product.
So I'm hearing that there are kind of different teams and team responses to changing requirements kind of in the sprint. In the chat, Chris sent a link to emergency protocol for mid-sprint changes. So that's kind of one option there. I'm hearing teams that are very strict about changing things in the sprint and option to kind of cancel those and double down. Some teams kind of respond by accepting those changes and adapting to that. So it's really the diversity here in responses is pretty awesome, and definitely consider using chat to continue this conversation. I do have a couple more questions that I want to get to because I'm very interested in this next one. And I see that, Ben, you kind of led us into this earlier in the chat. This one's about metrics and data and what you're looking at for your teams. Ben, one example that you gave us when you're prioritizing is the revenue cost estimation for stories in your backlog and using those to prioritize. So that's something at a story level. I'm kind of curious, as a team, measuring performance on a team, what are the metrics that you on the panel are using for measuring your team's health and predictability? Any data metrics nerds on the panel? Joyce, I see you laughing. You mentioned the graph over time. That's a good example. What else do you use?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm not like a super data math person, but I do definitely track velocity, I'd say primarily. But I think we have to be careful with that because it's not meant to be a measure of team performance. You don't really want your stakeholders, to be glued to that. I think the value of velocity is it's a measure of capacity. Um, so that's primarily why I track it. It's for the team to know how much they can accomplish and therefore be able to have those collaborative discussions. In terms of other metrics I track, I like tracking team health, just to understand kind of team happiness, how people are feeling sprint by sprint. So that is really just as simple as sending out an anonymous Google form every sprint for people. I do like emojis or numbers 1 through 5, and they can just kind of rate their happiness. And then I'll share those at the beginning of a retro so everybody has a sense of the team temperature. And that kind of frames our conversation. So if there's like 2s or 3s, then it's really clear that, okay, there's stuff we can talk about here. And I've sort of recently adjusted that a bit. Like instead of sending a survey, I'll also just put it as like a retro column, so what went well, what can improve, and then temperature check, which is anonymous. So that's been a really helpful tool at the team level.
So we've got the velocity, we have team health is a big emphasis, just happiness and working together. Shweta or Amber, are there any metrics that you like to use for your teams?
For me, I also go with the team health check. It's a broad category, so there's there's one that I had kind of evolved over time, starting with a set of questions. I think I'd initially picked up the questions from a Spotify set of team health questions that they had, but then I evolved those over time. And then we've also been open to taking on board some external tools that will do more regulated data across broader areas to get more of an enterprise view in understanding what's going on. But I think key areas that you do want to address are things like culture for sure, leadership, technical excellence, your backlog management, product planning. So there's a lot of areas that make up the effects on the team, and I think it becomes really important to get a broad view of all of that and not just hone in on whether it's velocity, delivery, or something like that, right? Because there's so many different elements that go hand in hand, which makes the team successful or not. And if you're going to come down to particular quantitative measures, so I hear a lot of people talk about cycle time, lead time, and things like that. I always question, what are you planning to use the measures for, right? Is it for some level of continuous improvement? Because if it's not, then that's a different problem we need to talk about. So really make sure that the measures are being used for good and for improvement, because if they're being used for any other purpose, you should not be measuring them. And I also try to let the teams own that measurement, like pick something that's meaningful to you that's going to help you make a change or improve. And if they can't come up with something, most likely leadership doesn't need to know that either. So that's my stance. I'm very team orientated when it comes to driving their own improvement and how they kind of run their team. So I will push back on any kind of anything against that. And sometimes I've gotten myself in trouble for that too, but that's a good one.
I actually want to follow up on this because there is a question about this, and I have seen my teams do this as well. So basically, help, my team is getting wrapped up in story points and velocity. So one of my teams was like, yeah, we got to do more. We got to bring the story in and close it because we need the points. Or another team figured out that anytime they said that a story would increase their velocity, the product owner would prioritize that. So that was kind of being used as a weapon. Shweta, what should I have done in those situations? What's your advice when teams themselves are getting wrapped up in story points and velocity? How do you rescue them from that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like those two measures in particular can so easily be gamed, right? So even if they find that they're improving, the question is, are they really improving? Like, what's the impact on the outcomes that are coming out of that team, right? So sometimes, just to kind of experiment or try and change the way they can think about it, I will challenge them to do away with story points even, and just even scale back to like t-shirt sizes and say, okay, if you didn't have the numbers attached to this, what are you able to do? Is it still similar to where you end up, right? I think there's definitely a bigger problem if product owner kind of jumps on the wagon as well and says, oh, I know you can do 50 story points. You did that last time, so maybe you can do 55, right? And some teams kind of are driven by that, right? And that becomes even more challenging because they end up burning out, and they will burn out at some point. And I think it's really hard for whether it's leadership or product owners to sometimes see the numbers go down. But they don't realize that, look, there's probably other good stuff happening as well. Maybe they're taking care of technical debt. Maybe they're really improving their definition of done. Maybe they're just building out a really good quality product. And even if they're not, maybe they need to stabilize, and that's okay, right? So I think the emphasis then needs to be kind of shifted to what's the quality of the product that's coming out? Are your end users really getting what they need? So are you just rushing to make the metrics? Or are you really delivering what needs to get delivered? So yeah, those are tough conversations, and to get the mindset to even being open to discussing that is sometimes challenging as well. But if you throw it at them as a challenge, for kind of fun's sake, and say, this sprint, let's try and do away with those points or something like that. And if you will either get a team that's open to it or not, but it's worth a try. But yeah, those are questions. You have to really ask them the question, like, why are you doing this, and make them understand for themselves, what's driving them to do these things.
Finding the meaning behind the metrics.
Yeah.
Joyce or Amber, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
This made me think of a post from Mountain Goat Software that kind of talks about this topic of when you're delivering value, should you be looking at output or outcome? And a lot of the conversation is always around outcomes. But he had this example of, I think the Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation, they had a project to ship like mosquito nets to communities in Africa to protect them from malaria. And so your outcome there, the value you're delivering, is the metric of less people, getting malaria. But that's something that you can't measure until you've done the output. And so I thought that was a really good way to look at it, because I think the value of output is often dismissed. But his whole illustration was showing that even though we don't know the outcome yet, there is still value in us, delivering a lot of output. So, shipping the mosquito nets, because only when we have that can we then know the outcome. So that's just something that this made me think of that I thought was helpful.
It's a perfect example. Amber, do you metrics, getting wrapped up in them? Any thoughts there?
So my teams are new on the metrics side. So we don't actually have any established metrics at the moment. But one thing that we do try and keep an eye on is, are we delighting the customer? Are we delivering things that are valuable to them and that are useful to them? And I think that's a good sign of success. If you're delighting the customer, if you're meeting their needs, and you're continuing to move forward in that direction, I think that's a huge win.
Yeah, it can be so easy to kind of lose sight of who we're doing this for and why, even though that is arguably the most important thing about Agile is the customer and the value and the feedback there. So yeah, that's a great point. And I see a question in chat about volatility. That is not a metric that I am familiar with. Has anyone used that either on the panel or anyone here? Volatility?
I can explain a little bit, but Olaf had a question before me.
And I will definitely get to Olaf's question
So
in a
volatility
second.
is the variation in the number, so it's like the stability of it. And the Pivotal Tracker, if any of you have ever used it, actually provides that number automatically. And so when I moved to Jira, I created it myself. So it's like, how consistent is the velocity, for example, and so you can then get a better gauge of how consistent the number is, which also obviously also indicates that the team is reaching some sort of level consistency.
I have never heard of that. And Deborah, you set us up for my next question, which is
You want
about
the
tools.
calculation? You want the calculation?
Yeah, send it to me in chat. Send us a link. I would love to know more.
Okay.
Uh, we're going to talk about favorites. And one thing, a question that I was getting in this meetup is what are your favorite tools to use in an agile setting? So, for example, we just got a subscription to Miro at Dolby, and I am obsessed. I went to their conference. I'm making all the Miro boards. That's been a lot of fun for me. What kind of tools do you use in your day to day, and which ones do you actually like using?
So, one of the tools that I like using, because we don't have subscriptions to Miro or some of those other resources, but I've been using Jamboard for our retros. And that's been nice because so I started my job completely remote. It's normally an in-person job, but I started right as everything shut down. And so I had to figure out a way, how can we do sticky notes online? How can we draw? How can we move things around and everyone can interact independently in their own spaces? And Jamboard's worked really well for all the things that I've used it for. So definitely, if you need a good free resource, that's been great. And just one tip on that. So recently, actually, when I did my retros, it was asking my team members to sign in. And some of them weren't, which surprised me because I made the link open to whoever had it. But just a tip, I just made a test Gmail account with a test password, and then I put it out to my group. So anyone who didn't want to log in with their own email account, they could just use this and still access the resource. So that helps people feel more comfortable with it as well.
That's a great tip. And I saw some applause for Jamboard, so we have at least one fan in the audience. Joyce, how about you? What are your favorite tools in an agile context?
Yeah, I don't think I have strong, preferences because I think for me it's how used to it I am. So in a previous company, I used Rally and got really well versed in it, and so that was my preferred tool. And then coming to Atlassian, I got to learn Jira. So at the beginning, I was like, I like Rally better, but now that I've gotten used to Jira, it's fine. So for me, the tool ends up being just a tool. And one learning I had from a course I took, uh, they said that the Agile community needs to learn how to operate in like a Armageddon, like if you don't have digital tools anymore, learning how to like make a burn down by hand. So that's kind of my take on it. The tool ends up just as a tool. So but when you first said tool, I actually wasn't thinking of software. I was thinking of like practices. And for those, I do have a number of preferred practices or tools in my tool belt. So for me, I really enjoy a lot of things that come from extreme programming and behavior-driven development. And again, I think that's informed by, my coaches and kind of what I learned through them and what I find can be really effective for teams relatively quickly. So I like to pull in those practices a lot.
That's great because my next question actually came from Olaf in the chat, and he was asking your favorite or most powerful model. So anything that you've come across or studied in Agile that you've used in your work. So things like extreme programming. Olaf, am I getting your question right here as far as what a model is?
Model. I'm not sure. Like, Gosh, now I can't even think of any. No, the Agile coaching model, for example. So the coaching model from the Agile Coaching Institute, that would be an example of a model, like a conceptual thing that you use maybe in teaching or in coaching that you find powerful.
Joyce, I know you have some experience and certifications with the IC Agile. Is there anything that you use from there?
So I don't know if this, is the model the right sort of thinking, but for me, yeah, it's more a conceptual thing. But I think when you ask people what is Agile, everyone has a different answer, and it's really hard to articulate clearly. And I know that was the case for me. So the clearest model or explanation I found was through IC Agile, through Ahmed Sidki. And yeah, you may all have heard this, but he sort of describes it as Agile is a mindset defined by 4 values, described by 4 values, defined by 4 values, described by 12 principles, and manifested through an unlimited number of practices. So I have found that to be the most clear and articulate model that I like to use.
Beta or Amber, any models that have stuck with you or that you use as a guideline in your practice?
So one of the models that I use, it's actually particularly related to retrospectives, but I like the model of 5 areas: setting the stage, gathering data, generate insights, decide what to do, and then close the retro. That's the format that I use in pretty much all of my retros, just to keep it organized and to keep a good flow of the activities. And if you guys ever want ideas of things you can do, retromat.org is a great resource. And then this may or may not be a model, but something I've recently come across that I'm starting to explore more is the 6 hats. It's based on a book, and it's different ways of looking at problems. And so I've just started digging into that a little bit, trying to understand that more. And I'm exploring to see if there's a way to do like a good retrospective around that, because we all have our kind of default ways of solving problems. But sometimes it's nice to look at it from a different angle or a different perspective, which is where the 6 hats model comes in. So I haven't had a lot of experience with it yet, but it's something that's recently been on my mind that I've been learning more about and exploring. So those are a couple ideas for you.
Yeah, I had not heard of the 6 hats. Is that like a book or a website? Where could I find more?
It's based on a book, but there are some website links, and I will try and grab them after the panel and post it in before we end, so then you can access those.
Thank you. And then Shweta, your favorite agile models?
So I don't think I have any specific that I would consider my favorite, because I like to kind of almost gamble with new ones as I come across them, but also I want to pick them for the appropriate situation at hand. So I definitely believe in the 5 stages of the retrospective. I think that's super important when you're doing the retrospectives, because if you don't go through those stages, you're essentially not going to end up with clear outcomes. And then obviously if there's no action items, those retros become one of those boring meetings that are not useful. An area that I like to really take on board is Management 3.0. So they have a set of various tools that are really about, again, coming down to the people level, kudos cards, which is just literally, gratitude towards your team members. There's delegation poker, like how do you delegate within a team? How does your manager or your TL get involved in that delegation? So they've got a set of tools that are very human centric. So I really, really enjoy using those. But otherwise, if you ever, or if you haven't already seen, I would suggest, looking up the Deloitte subway map for Agile. If you take a look at that, there's like a gazillion different practices, and like Scrum is at the very core center. And Scrum is always my go-to place, and just trying to get that instilled, it takes time in itself, and hopefully a lot of these additional practices come out of that. And I think if I'm understanding models the way intended for the question, you will get those out of Scrum as well. But the supporting practices, to even enhance that, take a look at that map, and you will find there's an incredible amount of sources there that you can just, probably create a knowledge base as much as you would with just Agile and Scrum, right? So it's just building out that toolkit to be able to use those different aspects where necessary.
I Googled it right
Did you
quick.
find it? If not, I can find it. Yeah.
I put the link in chat if people want to check out the subway map.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing. The first time I saw it, I was like, that can't be right. And I was like, yeah, that's right.
Man, it's a lot, but it's good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do one final question for the panel. And again, this is about favorites. So we kind of talked about our biggest challenge in Agile, and I'm looking for, if not your favorite, but a memorable moment that you have had along your journey where you've just felt like I've really succeeded, or I've really helped someone or my teams, or just something that has stuck with you as a moment of joy or satisfaction or accomplishment. Does anything come to mind?
For me, I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier when I facilitated an activity between a development team and the multiple product owners and managers. That was a huge win for me because the development team were able to express their concerns and challenges that they had been facing in a safe environment. And it helps the product owners understand more how the rubber hits the road and how some of their behaviors were affecting the team's ability to accomplish what they were asking. And afterwards, both sides seemed a lot more excited, and there was greater collaboration, and it just helped so much with both sides kind of moving forward in coordinated effort. And that was just such a happy moment for me.
That's a huge win for collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Joyce or Shweta, any moments that you would want to share?
Joyce,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think for me, what I find most rewarding about this job is the human aspect of it. So anytime I learn that I have made a lasting impact on someone, and this is more an intangible kind of the human side of things, right? Where people say, thank you, I feel advocated for, or like I feel more respected, I feel protected. It's those things that for me make it rewarding. And I think that can manifest in different ways. Sometimes it's one-on-one feedback, sometimes it's kind of during the review cycle. But I do like to cultivate it for the team. So I love sort of making every retro format different every sprint, and I cater it to how that sprint was. So if there was a big launch or something, or we tackled, some hairy problems, I like to include an appreciation or kudos, column. And that I just think is really, really beneficial for building up a strong team and building that kind of emotional trust. When you just see people calling out, hey, I really appreciated when you did this, and kudos to this person for that, you just see people light up, and that's the part I enjoy. And another thing is, there's always kind of benefits that come out of the struggle. So for me, I have one memory. So at Atlassian, I now work under the buyer experience team, but I used to be part of Trello. And I had such a hard time at Trello. Everybody was super resistant to Scrum, and it was just like always hitting a wall, right? But over time, I learned a lot of lessons and kind of helped the team transform and adopt Scrum. And there were people that were, really not interested, a little hostile to it. And what I really appreciate is that through that journey we went on, I now see them being me back then. Like they're the ones now advocating for Agile and writing up these pages to explain like why we should change our process. So that just makes me very proud. And I enjoy that the transformation piece. And that's what got me into it. I had my own transformation, so I like being part of other people's transformation.
That is amazing. That's so rewarding. The hardest resistors become the biggest advocates sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Laita, tell us your story.
Yeah, so I have a few that come to mind. One of my most recent ones has been for an individual who I think attended one of my training sessions maybe about 2 years ago. And it kind of, and she was hardcore project manager coming in. And it was really interesting just because I believe it was a 2-day class I had taught, very similar to the Certified Scrum Master class. And from her coming in day one, I saw the transition, kind of, the light bulbs going off by the end. And it was really interesting just to see, like, how she was very, certified in project management and very strong advocate of project management, how she got interested. I won't say she was converted by the end of it. She got interested. And then what's happened since then to date is that, she started attending internal events, reaching out for one-on-one mentoring and coaching. And I've built this amazing relationship with her where she is now the change agent for her department, for Scrum and Agile. And, if she has a problem, she'll come to me, or if she has a challenge in coaching, she comes to me. And just to see how that relationship started from almost like, wow, will this person make it, to where she's at, and just seeing that whole journey, and to think that you played a small part in that has been mind-blowing for me. So, the fact that you can make such an impact on an individual is really, really just fulfilling and satisfying. It's almost like, you really achieve your purpose and what you intended, to do. And then similarly along the lines of that, I had it's somebody who had recommended that their whole department take one of my trainings. And then when they did do that, the leaders actually attended the training, because they kind of mandated that we're going to do Scrum training just because it's a thing, right? Not because there was real major interest to kind of go Scrum, but, because they heard people were doing it. And when they left, again, they were just so motivated to turn their department around. And, from what I hear right now, is they are, one of the major catalysts in their org to be able to, advocate for Scrum. And now it's not just one person, it's like many people. So being able to make the change, whether it's at the individual level, at a team level, or at a department level, like any of those changes are just so fulfilling and satisfying. And sometimes you question your journey, right? As an Agile coach, or even as a Scrum Master, I think many people don't realize the pain that goes with it sometimes, the hard work that goes behind it. Very often, people see these roles as, oh, what do they do all day? They're just, running some meetings, or maybe they're just talking to some people or tracking our work. And I think when you're actually really passionate about this role, and you're really doing the things that, you should be doing, there's a lot of pain and heart that goes into it when there are challenges, and then a lot of emotion, and even you put a big piece of your personal self out there. You're very vulnerable, and I think you need to put your authentic self out there. So when you're doing all of those things, and when these things come through, it's just like, wow, that journey was worth it. Like, it really is amazing. So, that's what drives me to keep going. I mean, I've definitely had days where I'm like, oh, like, really? Why did I get into this? And, there are days where you're just like, wow, that small win was enough to like make my month. And it really is, like, change is hard. And I think just recognizing that from, the recipient's end, as well as for yourself, is super, super important, because Something that, a few people have been telling me more recently is don't forget about self-care. This role is very emotionally taxing. You don't realize in your day-to-day, but if you're really, really embedded and you're really out there with purpose, it can really take it out of you. So don't forget to self-care. Don't forget to take that time out for yourself, because you won't realize when you burn out. You really won't. And I've been pretty close to that. So kind of been there, done that. So, I give that wholehearted advice, like really kind of be careful with your boundaries. I'm not saying don't, go full on in. Definitely do that, because I think that's when you are able to make impactful change. But don't forget to take care of yourself as well. And I think that's something that we very easily forget to do.
Thank you so much for calling it out. Like you said, I think people who are not in this role just don't realize how hard it can be. But man, it is so rewarding when you get to make those changes and transformations and help people. And that's really why we're all here at the end of the day. So I want to say thank you to the panel for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and just hit the stop recording button now.